Hello again, welcome back. This is now the fifth program of December 6, 2012, Feast of St. Nicholas. And fifth would be, let me see here, that was the 38th, 43rd, no, 43rd in the overall program, plus those additional programs there. That's a little bit of work, and I hope those of you, the few of you who are viewing these later presentations, are finding them of interest and of help. I've written about all of this many times. I've spoken about it many times. However, it's good to put it into visual and audio form so that perhaps those who have difficulty remembering might have a source they could go to repeatedly, or at least show others to refer others to as well, which is my hope. There's no money in this, folks. I can only plead with you for your non-tax deductible financial gifts, as we have right now. Phone bills, water bill, sewer bill, electric, gas bill due, car payment due, car insurance due. Don't have the means to pay for all that. We rely upon you. Until my book can take off, I ask for your help on that. www.meetingthemets.com. We're in a pickle. We need your help. Non-tax deductible financial gifts, no liability to the giver, and nor to the recipient, but no benefit tax-wise to the donor. So please do consider helping us. We are in need of assistance. Thank you. Now, the last point I had made was discussing Longiqua Oceania. Pope Leo XIII, January 6, 1895, and Pope Leo was explaining that he knew that the clergy were not teaching his encyclical letters later on, some 24 years after the death of Pope Leo in 1903, and 1927, Alfred Smith, governor of New York, would be asked about, or heard that he was being criticized by a Protestant attorney as to why he would not be bound in conscience to observe the teaching of Pope Pius XI in Quas Primus concerning the social reign of Christ the King. And Governor Smith of New York said, and I'm cleaning this a little bit, what the Hades is an encyclical. He was a serious Catholic, but he had never heard of an encyclical letter. Didn't know what it was. This was not being taught. Pope Leo XIII knew it wasn't being taught. And he tried to wrap the fist into a velvet glove, praising the bishops where he could, saying that they should continue, as they had done at the Third Council of Baltimore, to encourage the practice of temperance and the frequent use of the sacraments and the observance of the just laws and institutions of the Republic, because Catholics can adapt themselves and must to those institutions, and can, without conceding anything to false principles. It's one thing to live in concrete circumstances without admiring the false premises upon which those institutions were built, and to obey just laws. But that line I want to re-emphasize right now, which is the swipe at the Ferraros and the Cuomos and the Kennedys, every single last one of them, and the Christopher Dodds and the Thomas Ridges and the Rudolph William Giulianis and the Susan Molinaris and the Rick Lazios and the George Patakis and the Susan Collinses and the Richard Durbins and Tom Harkins and Arnold Schwarzeneggers and Greg Davis and Governor Edmund G. Brown Jr., Jerry Brown in California, and Bill Richardson, former governor of New Mexico, Leon Panetta, is he the CIA director now? And everybody else. Could be the defense thing, I've lost track. And all of the other Catholics in public life, who Kathleen Sebelius, who are pro-abortion, Biden, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., and all of the rest. Here is your little, I'm personally opposed canard blown up in your face, although I've given you another quote of Leo XIII from Immortality Day that you seem to want to ignore, guys and gals. For that cannot be lawful in public, which is unlawful in private affairs. Got it? It doesn't make any difference what the majority says, what the Supreme Court says. We have to obey God, not men. Our duty is not to be elected to please the people. Our duty is to get to heaven and to be faithful to Christ the King as he has discharged his mind in Holy Mother Church, period. That is our duty. As the situation deteriorated in this country with respect to Catholics in just 3 years, Pope Leo XIII, concerned about the influence of the biography of Isaac Thomas Eckert by Abbot Klein, wrote an apostolic letter to James Cardinal Gibbons. Now, later Gibbons tried to smooth things over and mollified Pope Leo XIII. But Testem Benevolentia Nostra stands as a clarion call in opposition to, as well as Pope St. Pius X's Notre Charge Apostolique on the Sion, as well as Pope Pius XI's Ubi Arcano de Concilio and Quas Primus on the social reign of Christ the King, the mockery of international institutions such as the League of Nations, in contradistinction to the praise by John XXIII, Angelo Roncalli, Giovanni Montini, Angelo Roncalli, John the 23rd, in Pacem in Terris, April 11th, 1963, and of course Paul the Sick, Giovanni Montini, October 4th, 1965, praising the United Nations as the last best hope for peace and concord of mankind, of Wojtyła, John Paul II, of Ratzinger, Benedict XVI, that Pope Leo XIII used Testem Benevolentia as a clarion call, and truly being guided by God the Holy Ghost, to condemn in advance conciliarism and the conciliar mindset. And just to back up here, before I get into his apostolical letter, Testem Benevolentia Nostra, and then hereafter, once I get through this, which should take another 3 presentations, I will then take a little turn to Paris to discuss, as I have in an earlier presentation, some of the ideas of the French Revolution and the rights of man, and explain how those ideas and those of Americanism infiltrated Our Lady's dear country, Mexico, and would lead to the American bishops, for the most part, with some exceptions, turning their back on the assault against Catholicism in Our Lady's country, and doing the bidding, again, at least for the most part, of the American government in this regard. Something I've discussed in my 5-part series, Then, Now, and Always, Viva Cristo Rey, but I want to present in this lecture series because it gives a little window into the infidelity of the true bishops in the United States of America in the 19th and 20th centuries leading up to our own days. But I want to back up a little bit and explain that, as I explained in the first presentation, both in the one that I did originally and the one that I redid, the real start of the lecture program, as I call it, online, the purpose of these lecture programs is to provide Catholics with a framework to understand more clearly the world in which we live. We live in a world of naturalism. The devil wants us to be agitated. People fill their heads with Glenn Beck, or Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, Bill O'Reilly. All of these. Why? What do they have to teach you? How is this going to help you get home to heaven? For all of the years Limbaugh has been on the radio, Republicans have won how many elections? 88. Insofar as the presidential elections. 88, 2000, 2004. Both of those by narrow margins. Democrats have won in 96, 92, 96, 2008, 2012. It's a divided track record. And all of the agitation. Sean Hannity, let freedom ring. There can be no true freedom for a country that does not yoke itself to the sweet yoke of the cross of the divine Redeemer. Everything else must fall apart. And to explain the dangers of our own situation, I want to again summarize. I went into the Middle Ages, but I want to provide you this wonderful summary, because men forget. Pope Leo XIII, and most American Catholics in the United States of America have forgotten, including most traditionally minded Catholics, of the reality in which men lived at one time. During the Catholic Middle Ages, Christendom, the Christ-centered world of Christendom. In Immortality Day, November 1st, 1885, Pope Leo XIII wrote, "There was a time when states were governed by the principles of gospel teaching. Then it was that the power and divine virtue of Christian wisdom had diffused itself throughout the laws, institutions, and morals of the people, permeating all ranks and relations of civil society. Then, too, the religion instituted by Jesus Christ, established firmly in befitting dignity, flourished everywhere by the favor of princes and legitimate protection of magistrates, and church and state were happily united in concord and friendly interchange of good offices. The state, constituted in this wise, bore fruit beyond all expectation, whose remembrance is still and always will be in renown, witnessed to as they are by countless proofs which can never be blotted out or even obscured by any craft of any enemies." On that point, he did not foresee the power of a media that really didn't exist in his day, which has indeed obscured the glory of everything he spoke about, everything he wrote about. The glory of Christendom. It was a bad time, the Dark Ages. Terrible. Repression, the Inquisition. Of course, there was no quote-unquote the Inquisition. Dr. Manning at Harvard has written very clearly on the Spanish Inquisition, the different inquisitions that existed with due process, why they were created, and the mythology created about them by the English. And there was far more torture and bloodshed and arbitrariness in Protestant England. And to cover their crimes, they invented the myths of the so-called Inquisition, still used as the boogeyman by ignoramuses on television. Ignoramuses who have never studied true history. Blowhards, airbag, windbags, people who know nothing, but get well paid for imparting the little that they know. These people have indeed obscured public schools, conciliar schools, textbooks, motion pictures, television programs. They have obscured this glory, unfortunately. Most Catholics are completely ignorant of it. They think everything should be in the world the way things are in the United States. If only we got back to the founding principles. If you got back to the founding principles, you'd get here. I had a Catholic speaking to me, a serious Catholic, rather prominent Catholic in conservative circles, who said to me, oh, the founding principles, they're pretty good. He was incapable of understanding the founding principles were flawed and that would lead us directly to where we were when I was speaking to him in the 1990s. False premises lead inevitably and inexorably to bad consequences. Pope Leo XIII went on to say in Immortality Day, Christian Europe has subdued barbarous nations and changed them from a savage to a civilized condition, from superstition to true worship. Well, it's gotten in reverse now because of contraception and abortion and conciliarism, the sacramental barrenness of conciliarism. Catholics have returned to barbarism and superstition. They victoriously, meaning Catholicism, rolled back the tide of Mohammedan conquest, which is they're winning by procreation what they have lost in battle now. What they lost in battle centuries ago, they're winning by contraception, by birth now. Retained the headship of civilization, all and every branch of national culture, bestowed on the world the gift of true and many-sided liberty, and most wisely founded very numerous institutions for the solace of human suffering. And if we inquire how it was to bring about so altered a condition of things, the answer is beyond all question in large measure through religion, under whose auspices so many great undertakings were set on foot, through whose aid they were brought to completion. That is, it was through the true religion, the Catholic faith, that this was brought to fruition. And Pope Leo XIII went on to say, paraphrasing now, that it would have continued such had there not been the Protestant Revolution, and then from there that sprung all of the wellspring of errors in which he was living at the end of the 19th century, in which we live today. So in 1899, therefore, to remind Cardinal Gibbons that there was a world before the United States of America, a Catholic world that had existed in the Americas itself, as I explained in earlier presentations. Therefore, he examined first of all, the writing of Father Isaac Thomas Hecker as presented by Abbot Klein, which was very accurate, as Monsignor Delassus noted, and even though some today say it's a phantom heresy, all-Americanism, it existed. It's a real heresy. It's no phantom heresy. It's a very foundation, building block of conciliarism. And Pope Leo XIII noted in Testem Benevolentia to Cardinal Gibbons, the principles on which the new opinions, meaning Americanism, we have mentioned are based may be reduced to this, that in order the more easily to bring over to Catholic doctrine those who dissent from it, the Church ought to adapt herself somewhat to our advanced civilization, and relaxing her ancient rigor, show some indulgence to popular modern theories and methods. That's Vatican II, folks. The principles on which the new opinions we have now mentioned are based may be reduced to this, that in order the more easily to bring over to Catholic doctrine those who dissent from it, the Church ought to adapt herself somewhat to our advanced civilization, and relaxing her ancient rigor, show some indulgence to modern popular theories and methods. Ratzinger, the New Theology, historical critical method of scriptural exegesis, evolution of dogma, the new liturgy to adapt itself. a renewed liturgy to the changing time, to the modern needs of man. Penance, outward forms of penance belong to another era or age in the history of the church. But here we see the pride of modern men. Modern man who believes that he has new insights into the nature of the human being and how he is to live in a supposedly new age. The faith of our fathers? No, not at all. So, I want to go through this step by step to explain. Pope Leo XIII understood how Catholics were being deceived into thinking everything was new, and that they did not have to believe and act in the United States of America with all of the supposed national greatness. How Catholics had acted and believed and acted through the centuries in Europe and in the Catholic Americas. Pope Leo XIII went on to say, many think that this is to be understood not only with regard to the rule of life, but also to the doctrines in which the deposit of faith is contained. For they contend that it is opportune in order to work in a more attractive way upon the wills of those who are not in accord with us, to pass over certain heads of doctrines as if of lesser moment, or to so soften them that they may not have the same meaning which the Church has invariably held. I want to go over that with you. Many think that this is to be understood not only with regard to the rule of life, but also to the doctrines in which the deposit of faith is contained. For they contend that it is opportune, in order to work in a more attractive way upon the wills of those who are not in accord with us, to pass over certain heads of doctrines, that is, we won't discuss some things, as is of lesser moment. There are fundamental truths, non-fundamental truths, or to so soften them that they may not have the same meaning which the Church has invariably held. Modernism, the new theology, evolution of dogma. Do you see it? Started here. Sure, it was in France, Germany. I grant you. I concede the point. But everything would lead into the Second Vatican Council, the coalition of errors leading into the so-called Second Vatican Council. Pope Leo XIII went on to say that this presents a real danger to Catholics because they are being convinced that they are living in a situation that is advanced and tolerant of them, when in essence their faith is being undermined, as I've explained in other lectures, but again, people forget. The devil raised up nice, tolerant Protestants, some of them weren't so tolerant, and Freemasons in the United States of America to persuade Catholics to let down their guard so that their sensus catholicus would be so clouded by the niceness and sentimentality and the rationalism that they would not seek to defend the faith and recognize the dangers in which they found themselves. Whereas in Europe, when you were confronted with an open enemy, as the Cristeros were confronted, as the Catholics were in France, as the Catholics were at the time of the Protestant Revolution in Germany, the German states, and in England, you're confronted with the cultural conflict, the Risorgimento in Italy, during the Spanish Revolution, Communist Revolution in Spain, Bolshevik Revolution. When Catholics are faced with an open enemy, It's easier to resist. The Vendée in France resisted. It is more difficult to see the dangers posed by insidious efforts to undermine the faith. And it is that which concerned Pope Leo XIII, that men were living in this atmosphere of insidious evil, which resulted, unfortunately, in a situation of acquiescence to the prevailing spirit of the day. He went on to write to Cardinal Gibbons, "Now, beloved son, few words are needed to show how reprehensible is the plan thus conceived. If we but consider the character and origin of the doctrine which the Church hands down to us." On that point, the first, what we call today the First Vatican Council, says, "The doctrine of the faith which God has revealed is not proposed like a theory of philosophy which is to be elaborated by the human understanding, but as a divine deposit delivered to the spouse of Christ to be faithfully guarded and infallibly declared." Beloved son, meaning Cardinal Gibbons, few words are needed to show how reprehensible is the plan that is thus conceived. If we but consider the character and origin of the doctrine which the Church hands down to us. On that point, the Vatican Council, meaning the First Vatican Council, says, "The doctrine of the faith which God has revealed is not proposed like a theory of philosophy which is to be elaborated by human understanding, but as a divine deposit delivered to the spouse of Christ to be faithfully guarded and infallibly declared." There's such thing as evolution of the faith, evolution of the dogma. This is a slam, a reiteration of the principles outlined, the condemnation of the evolution of dogma in the Syllabus of Errors by Pius IX, the Vatican Council, April 24th, 1870, and by Pope St. Pius X in Pascendi Dominici Egregius, and Oath Against Modernism, Pope Pius XII, in Humani Generis, August 12, 1950. But what he's condemning here, Pope Leo XIII was condemning what is propagated under the so-called hermeneutic of continuity by Joseph Anthony Benedict XVI. And if you want to bury your heads in the sand and say, no, that's not so, then go right ahead. But you are deceiving yourselves. And if you are in a position of some prominence to teach, or whether on the internet or in a classroom to others, and you don't recognize this, you are committing a grave error. Pope Leo XIII warned Cardinal Gibbons, "Nor is the suppression of certain doctrines, meaning the social teaching of the Church, to be considered altogether free from blame, which designedly omits certain principles of Catholic doctrine and buries them, as it were, in oblivion. For there is one and the same author and master of all the truths that Christian teaching comprises, the only begotten Son who is in the bosom of the Father," Pope Leo XIII noted. "That they are adapted to all ages and nations is plainly deduced from the words which Christ addressed to his apostles. Going therefore, teach ye all nations, teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I have commanded you. Behold, I am with you all days, even to the consummation of the world. Wherefore, the same Vatican Council says, by divine and Catholic faith, those things are to be believed which are contained in the Word of God, either written or handed down to proposed by the Church, whether in solemn decision or by the ordinary universal magisterium, to be believed as having been divinely revealed. That is, it is no longer possible for Catholics to claim that they have the right to dissent from certain things, or to say that the social teaching of the Church, the binding nature of the social teaching, and